Swale. And good evening, everyone. Welcome to an unapologetically selfish and guilt-free talk on the power of boundaries. Now, I can almost see a few of you shifting in your seats and cringing at the word selfish, but let's just take a pause for a second and reframe that. One of my favorite quotes comes from the iconic Coco Chanel, who once said, "One of the most courageous acts in life is to think for yourself aloud." In a lot of societies, this bold self-assertion, especially for women, is very often termed as selfish. But today, I'm here to challenge that notion, redefine what it means to be selfish, and unpack some of our own biases. When I decided to address boundaries with a specific focus on women for this evening's talk, some of my male acquaintances remarked saying, "Khyati, we hope you realize that boundaries isn't just a challenge for women. Men grapple with it too." And you know what? They're absolutely right, and I fully acknowledge that. Having said that, let me marinate you in some statistics. Independent of rank, the median female employee spends 200 more hours per year on non-promotable tasks than her male counterparts. To put that in perspective, that's one extra month on dead-end assignments that has to be completed, but no one else wants to do it. 70% of women say they face the imposter syndrome at work, having the need to overcompensate, take on more tasks, and constantly prove their worth just because they have to. 1 in 3 women say they fear the backlash every time they negotiate for a higher pay or set boundaries. And then there is the prove it again bias, where women and underrepresented groups are expected to show 2.5 times more evidence of competence than anyone else in the organization. So yes, while boundaries are a challenge for everyone, its impact on women is particularly profound, making tonight's conversation all the more crucial. When I started prepping for this talk, I did what every good researcher does. I Googled. I Googled the term female bosses, and what popped up was eye-opening and infuriating. Some of the top search headlines included 8 tips to survive a female boss. What's up with bitchy female bosses? Female bosses are a nightmare, reveals study. Now, you see, there's actually a fancy academic term to describe the scorn against women, and that is called as a role congruity theory. For the past 10 years, my research has gravitated around this topic, which simply suggests in a nutshell that society rewards those who stick to traditional gender norms and punishes those who dare to break them. Think about it. What are the qualities that we associate with good leaders? Competence, confidence, assertiveness, ambition. These are the traits you expect every good leader to have, regardless of gender. But here's the catch. Because these qualities are an antithesis to stereotypical feminine behavior, women who do display them, either naturally or in a bid to get ahead, have to face something called as a likability penalty, which simply means that women who do display these leadership qualities are consistently rated as less likable by both men and women. We are all conditioned, whether we realize it or not, to expect women to be warm, to be nurturing, to be submissive. But the irony of that, women who are too feminine or who are viewed as too feminine are also seen as less competent in a traditional managerial setting. So female leaders are perpetually trapped in this double bind where assertiveness is seen as arrogance and even as a matter of fact, cooperation is seen as indecisiveness. Women are constantly walking this tightrope of being too much or not enough. So in a nutshell, female leaders are damned if they do and damned if they don't. Now, one thing that we really need to understand is that the seeds of likability penalty do not come to us when we enter our workforce. It comes to us much before. Growing up, I learned that being a girl was like mastering an art form. From a very young age, it was made very clear to me that it was important for people to like you. And being liked meant putting other people's needs above your own, never really voicing out an opinion that would rock the boat, and being pretty and gracious in just about every situation. As I grew up, I ended up doing people-pleasing as my full-time job. To be unflinchingly honest, I was like a walking Yelp, consistently seeking for 5-star reviews from everyone who I passed paths with. But having said that, I think it was that I was fully committed to this whole act of being agreeable, and I thought it was my life's mission to make everyone happy, everyone, except, of course, myself. So, why am I telling you all this now? You see, a therapist costs $250 an hour, and this is way cheaper. But having said that, I'm also an executive coach, so I don't just vent, but I offer solutions, which I don't really drop for free, but when I do, I make it a TED Talk. So why? Why is it that across cultures, across hemispheres, women struggle with this? In order to try and unravel the science behind it, I want you to try a quick exercise with me. I want you all to fold your arms. Fantastic. I want you to look down and see which arm is on top. Great. Unfold them now and fold them back with the other arm on top. Oh, yeah. How did that feel? Weird? Uncomfortable? It just felt like, somebody out there was like, whoa, arms don't twist that way. I don't work that way. Now, what we did right here is a very interesting exercise that highlights something very, very important. Our subconscious mind is a master programmer. From a very young age, our subconscious mind learns behaviors and solidifies them. So every time you try to change it, your brain creates some level of confusion, and that's where it resists, because you've always been accustomed to doing things a certain way. Our subconscious is so incredibly powerful that it can process up to 11 million pieces of information every second. And in order to try and cope with such large chunks of data, it learns to try and solidify this behavior and gets into an autopilot mode, highly relying on ingrained patterns of behavior. And that is the reason we never have to overthink every time you have to open the door, take a shower, or perhaps even drive home without remembering the last few miles. That is the power of the subconscious. Now, for women, our subconscious has been on an autopilot mode, powered by 5,000 years of patriarchy that defined our role as caretakers. And then there was organized religion that reinforced the fact that for women, self-focus meant selfishness. And then there was something that I like to call the Disney conditioning. From the time we were little, we were fed stories. We were fed stories of being the good girl. The good girl who was always quiet, who was always agreeable, and who would always wait for someone to save the day, just like Snow White. We learned that love and happiness came to us when we froze our own emotions for the sake of others, like Elsa in Frozen. And then they were the classic damsel in distress narratives that hammered home the idea that our true worth lies not in being the heroes of our own story, but by being rescued. It was this conditioning that taught us that being respected is not as important as being liked. And that is why we became experts at saying yes to everyone except ourselves, of course. Now, to try and understand how deep this conditioning runs, I want you to try again a quick exercise to try and see this in action, all right? I want all of you to hold up your index finger. I want you to draw the capital letter E on your forehead as fast as you can. Go ahead, don't overthink it. All right, fantastic. Now, it's possible that you would have drawn the capital letter E in two ways. One, that is readable to yourself in a mirror, and one that's readable to others. Now, this little exercise highlights simply about how we all view and relate to the world. If you ended up drawing the capital letter E in a way that was readable to others, you have a tendency to prioritize other people's perspectives, which means you're more outward directed by nature. If you draw the capital letter E in a way that was readable to you in a mirror, you're more concerned about your inner perspective, you're inner directed by nature. Most people, especially women, have an innate tendency to be outward directed. And this outward directedness is just not confined to drawing on your forehead, but it also determines how we set or fail to set boundaries, how we make choices, how we prioritize in life, and how we handle life's challenges. But having said all of this, it doesn't really mean that we are all doom and gloom and we're a lost cause. It is true, because of this outward directed nature that we have, women on an average make less ambitious offers and get worse outcomes on a bargaining table. But there is Hannah Riley, a researcher who discovered that there is one instance, while women in general do make less aggressive offers whenever they're negotiating for themselves, there is one situation where they're incredibly more efficient than men, and that is when they're advocating for others. And I bet each and every one of you in this room has been in that place at some point while you were advocating for a coworker, a friend, or maybe your child. So the next time you hear yourself fiercely defending someone, I want you to take a beat. I want you to listen to that voice. That voice, it's strong. And guess what? It's yours. Perhaps you've simply forgotten to harness that power for yourself. A few years ago, I read a really great book written by Bronnie Ware, an Australian nurse, who spent years taking care of patients in their last few days in a palliative care. In her book, The Top 5 Regrets of Dying, she shares profound insights about people's regrets in their last few days. And what truly was amazing was, and also heartbreaking, was how simple these regrets were. The top 5 regrets were, number 1, I wish I had the courage to live a life that's true to myself and not what others expected of me. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. I wish I stayed in touch with my friends. I wish I let myself be happier. As I read these words, it felt like a punch to the gut. You see, in what I now like to call the past, I was a full-blown workaholic crazy. And my inner workaholic, oh boy, she was scary and she was incredibly terrifying. And God bless anyone who came in her way. Rest, oh no, that word didn't ever exist in her vocabulary. Not once would she ever turn back to me and say, "You've done enough, take a break." No, on the contrary, she would relentlessly drive me to believe that an empty calendar meant that I was perhaps irrelevant or worthless. So I worked, and I worked, and I worked endlessly. So what if in the process I was only scrapping by 5 hours of sleep every night? So what if I was on call 24/7 every single day, year after year? So what if my health was slipping away and my energy was drained to the bone? So what if I was battling dark corners in my mind and losing pieces of myself in the grind? At that moment, it just felt like it was worth it because I was ticking every box and I never let my work falter. What I didn't realize was I had all the other parts of my life crumbling and falling apart right under my nose. It wasn't until I hit rock bottom that I realized that my perfect exterior was only trying to hide a spectacular mess inside of me. And that is when I had to face my inner workaholic and set boundaries. Rock solid, non-negotiable boundaries. But when I did that, I did have the people pleaser in me who sat on my shoulders and said, "Boundaries? Really, Khyati? Isn't that selfish? Good luck being on everyone's favorite list now." But you know what? Here's the brutal truth, my friends. If you do not take control of your time and your life, everything and everyone else will. But having said that, I also need to give you a heads up. Setting boundaries comes with a cost, and it's not for the faint-hearted. Every time you say no or set limitations, you're bound to perhaps disappoint someone or not meet their expectations. And that someone may be your boss, maybe your coworker, maybe a friend, or maybe even a family member. You're going to go through pangs of guilt, and there are people who are going to they're bound to react with anger, they're bound to react with disappointment. Loved ones are going to be hurt in the process. But have the patience. Let them scramble for a bit. Perhaps you have spent years together scrambling for them, and perhaps it's just their time to do that right now. As I wrap up, I'm going to leave you with this. And I think this is something that I want to remind both you and me. Every time you say yes to something, ask yourself, what are you truly giving up? Because what you're giving up is perhaps something that matters the most to you in life. And that may be that one passion project that has been gathering dust for years together, the laughter shared around a dinner table, the opportunity to watch your kids grow, that health that you've neglected for years together, or simply the joy of being truly present in your own life. Saying no is not an act of selfishness. It's an act of self-gratitude, where you choose freedom over fear, authenticity over approval, and joy over judgment. Boundaries aren't about keeping other people out or shutting them out. It's just about carving that little space for yourself where you could breathe, you could thrive, you could grow, and you could be you. That, my friends, is where true freedom begins. That is where you begin. Thank you very much. It's been a privilege sharing this evening with you.